Adding a grain soaker to your sourdough is a great way to diversify your baking, increase the health benefits of your bread, and of course, get a lot of extra flavor in there. In this video, I'm gonna show you how to make a multi-grain sourdough bread. As you can see, I've just baked a pile of these loaves. Let's get started and I'll show you how to bake this. To prep this bread, we're gonna need our grain soaker and a ripe Levain. Because the soaker needs to be done the night before you bake, I like to do the Levain the night before as well. So I have my ripe Levain here. It is definitely ready to be fed. It's starting to recede in the middle, got some bubbles. I'm gonna start here with 45 grams of Levain, 560 grams of cold water. And next up, I'm gonna put 560 grams of flour in here so that we have equal flour and water. But I'm gonna do 80% bread flour and 20% rye, which works out to 448 bread flour and 112 rye. The rye gives it that extra boost. There's heavy sugars in here and it makes my starter really happy. So we're gonna do 100, oh, don't do that, don't spill the flour everywhere. We're gonna put 112 grams in, okay. I don't usually go particularly exact with this. I just do my best. So if I have a gram or two over of rye, it's fine. We're just looking for about 20%. And I don't quite have enough bread flour there. So we're gonna add the rest of this, okay. So we're just gonna mix this up. Get all the sides scraped down really super well. And this is gonna take about 10 hours to reach its peak. So I'm now gonna set this off to the back and leave this over here. And in the meantime, we'll create our grain soaker. In front of me here, I've got some different grains. We've got red fife, we've got oats, we've got spelt, and I've got some rye. You could also use things like einkorn, millet, amaranth. You could grind some seeds through this if you want. Sesame, sunflower, both are great. So to start, I'm gonna measure my grains and I need about 600 grams total. So that'll be 200 of each. Oh, 206. Doesn't need to be exact, so don't worry. Oh, my math is off. What am I talking about? It's about 150 grams each. And there we go, 590, there's 600, good enough. I try to do about 32% soaker, but if I had a little bit extra, I'll just use it, and I'd rather have too much than not enough. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take a look over here at our Como mill. So I am going to set this on a coarser setting and we're going to just crack the grains. I like to mix them first because they'll all crack a little differently, and if you've got things like oats or millet in there, you want everything to go through and get ground. Once your grains are done, you should have a nice, beautiful pile. If you look closely, you'll see some cracked grains, a little bit of what looks like flour, half pieces of oat, and that's perfect because that's gonna absorb a lot of water and give us a really great soaker. The next thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna add a little pinch of salt to this. The salt is optional in the grains, but I like to add just a little bit of salt. This is 4 grams, and that's gonna help season and flavor the grains. It's kind of like when you cook pasta, you want to salt the water so that you season the pasta as it cooks. I'm going to use this container here. You can use whatever you want. It's just a little bit easier to stir it in here. So we're going to transfer this into here. Try not to spill it all over your table. If you do spill it, these handy little dough scrapers that we use to scrape our bowls double as a bench table cleaner scraper thing. Next up, I'm gonna grab my boiling water and we're gonna pour 2 parts water to 1 part grain in here. This water is boiling and I'm gonna add it 2 parts, 914 grams, 915 grams. Try not to overdo it. You're gonna pour this in. And then you want to stir this up, and this is really important. Often I see pictures of grain soakers where they haven't been quite fully absorbed, where the water hasn't quite been fully absorbed. So you really want to make sure to mix this up really well and give it a good stir so that all the grains are fully hydrated. We don't want any dry patches. We're going to pop a lid on this, set it back here. I'm going to get cleaned up, and I'll see you tomorrow for dough mixing. We're gonna start with our Autolyse. Right now I've got my grain soaker ready, my Levain is rising, and it's time to start the Autolyse so that by the time the Levain is ready, the dough is ready. I'm gonna put in my water, flour, we've got bread flour, and we've got freshly milled organic whole wheat or hard red spring. If you're looking to scale this recipe, you can check out the dough calculator. I'll leave a link to it below in the comments, and it'll allow you to scale from one recipe to as many as you want, even in the thousands. You can also adjust the ratios, percentages of flours, maybe you want to use less whole wheat or more, and you can adjust the recipe very, very easily with the dough calculator I've created. During the Autolyse, I like to scrape down the bowl, make sure there's no dry bits on the side. So I'm just gonna stop the dough mixer, and with a wet scraper, I'm gonna start to scrape down the sides of the mixing bowl. So you wanna get in there and make sure you get all the dry bits out of there, and that should be good. I'm gonna let this Autolyse for 1 hour before we add the Levain, our grain soaker, and the salt. Just gonna place a towel on top of the mixer and close this off. Set a timer for 1 hour. This dough's been Autolysing for about an hour, and it's time to mix in the Levain, then the salt. First thing I like to do is take a look at the dough itself, and you'll see that it's got a really good extensibility and stretch to it. I've already measured out my salt, my stage 2 water, and I'm gonna start to measure the Levain. So to do that, I'll put it on the scale. I'm gonna add just a splash of the water too, and then I will take out the Levain into the container. I'm gonna take our Levain. You can see it's nice and beautiful in there. Nice and sticky, thick, well mixed, well risen. It's gonna be very good, smells great. We're gonna add the Levain now. That little bit of water in the bottom is gonna help it come out, just to keep try to get everything in there. And I've also got a little bit of extra sourdough starter in here in my container. And that's just gonna be to perpetuate my starter and keep it going. If you don't know how to feed your starter and maintain it, I've got a video on that. I'll leave a link for that in the description below. So we're gonna close the mixer. I like to set a timer for 20 minutes, just to give me an idea of how long the mixing total is. And this is gonna mix for about 15 to 18 minutes. I'm gonna mix this in the spiral mixer at about 125 RPM. I'm gonna slowly raise it up. That's about the equivalent of a 2 on a planetary mixer if you're using this style mixer. I'm gonna let this dough mix for about 5-6 minutes before I add the water too. Then we're gonna do that for another 5 to 8 minutes, and then we'll add the salt, and then we'll add the soaker after all. The soaker, you can see from sitting overnight, it's quite thick. And this is really what you wanna see. You don't want this to be watery or runny or wet in any way, because you want this to fully absorb into the dough. So if you can see here, it's really thick, and that is perfect. This is the biggest watch point for making this kind of dough, is make sure your soaker has fully absorbed all the water. So this dough has now been mixing for 6 minutes. I got a little distracted there, and I'm going to add water too. So in a planetary mixer, you're gonna wanna stream this in and add a little bit at a time. For a spiral mixer, we can just sort of add it like this, and I'll pour it right into the middle. You're gonna see the dough split a little bit, and that's okay. This double hydration technique is a great way to mix your dough. It's called bastonnage, and it's a process where we're adding a second stage water. It really helps with a strong gluten development. So if you want to get a really strong bread and add lots of water, this is the way to go. At this point too, you can also adjust your water if you think you need a bit more. So you can always add a little bit. Now, keep in mind, we're gonna add this grain soaker to our dough. So just watch your hydration in the mixer, because if you add this and it's too wet, it's really gonna slack your dough. But we're trying to make a really strong dough here. Next up, we can add the salt. So we've been about 12 minutes of mixing time, and we're gonna add the salt. So I'm just gonna put this in here. With the salt, I like to just add a little tiny amount of water. If you're mixing a big batch of dough, that little bit of water with the salt's not gonna make a difference. If you're mixing a very small amount and you put too much water, you could really change the hydration. So just keep that in mind depending on your batch size. So we're coming up on 15 minutes of mixing time. Our salt is in, we're right on point. Next, we're gonna add our multigrain soaker. We are now at a very good gluten development here, so you can see that we've got a strong window, a very strong dough. The tear breaks very clean on this, and it's time to add our soaker. Now we're gonna add our grain soaker to this, so you can take your scraper and just get in there and get it. You can also just get it out with your hand if you want. I'm gonna try and get all of this. It should be really thick. It should be a bit hard to get out of the container. We are going to put this last little bit. You see it comes out in one big chunk like that, which is great. Get this all in the mixer, and then we're gonna start, and then we're gonna finish our mixing. All right, our dough is mixed. We're gonna let this sit in the mixer for about 15 minutes. We're gonna test the strength, we're gonna take a look, and then we'll take it out and get it into the bulk fermentation stage. Dough's been resting in the mixer for about 20 minutes, and we're gonna take it out. One thing that's kind of nice when you rest the dough in the mixer is you can really see the gluten, and you get a really relaxed dough. Wow. And to take this out of the mixer, I'm gonna use wet hands. So I'm gonna wet my hands. I'm gonna go underneath the dough. We're gonna pinch this off, and then we're gonna pull a chunk out and put it into here. If you did your job right, you should be able to take the dough out in, 2 or 3 pieces, maybe 4, but really it'll come out together because a really well mixed dough will stick to itself. I mean, look when I hold this, it just hangs down like that because it's extremely well developed. Yeah, I've just got a little bit left in here. Dough is in the tub. We're gonna take the dough temperature and we're gonna let this bulk ferment for 3 hours. In that 3-hour time period, we're gonna give it something 1 to 3 folds. For this dough, just judging on how it feels, it'll probably be 2, but I always give the first fold and then I sort of decide about the second. You wanna leave yourself a good 90 minutes after the last fold before you start to divide your dough for shaping, and just to have a good time to relax. Otherwise, let the dough rise and do its thing. Our dough's been resting in the bulk fermentation tub for about 30 minutes, and we're gonna give it its first fold. So using wet hands, I'm gonna give this dough a really good stretch. Look at that. Look at the extensibility. Wow. And just throw the dough up and over itself. So I pick it up and go forward. If you've oiled the bin well, like I did, it will not stick at all. And it also helps if your dough is really well developed. You can see I can pick the whole thing up there and then just place that back into my container. We're gonna put the lid back on, let it sit for about another 30 minutes, give it its next fold, and then we're not gonna touch it until we shape it. Time to do our second fold. You can see there's nice bubbling on the dough. It's risen visibly. This fold is gonna slightly degas, regulate temperature, and build some strength so that when we move into our shaping, we got a really strong dough. Wet hands, you're gonna reach underneath, release the dough from the container and give it a good stretch up and just work your way down the dough until you get to the very end. You can pick the whole thing up, give it a turn, and let it just fall back into the container. This dough smells amazing from all those grains in there, and I can't wait to bake this. It's time to divide this dough. It's actually a little bit more than I'd like it to have risen before dividing, but I got a family and things get busy. So we're gonna take the dough out of the container. It should come out relatively easily. Oh yeah, there you can see that there. And it's a little sticky from the soaker, but it's overall comes out pretty clean from the container. And next thing, I'm just gonna start to divide this dough into 900 gram pieces. For sure, if you wanted to make this a little bit smaller, you could, but we're gonna go 900 today because that's my preferred size. And if you wanted to scale this in a different way, check out the dough calculator that I've left in the description, and you can make any size of dough that you would like and any size of loaf, and it makes it really easy for you. The sticker just fell off my scale. I do like this scale, but that's a bit cheap. This dough feels really good. Hopefully this is a great bake tomorrow. So now we're going to use the dough scraper and just pull this into a tight ball for the pre-shape, and then I'll line them up on the table where we're gonna let them relax for about half an hour. So this is pretty quick. We're gonna realign our gluten. We're gonna give it its primary structure and shape. So I'm gonna flour the top of the loaf. Ugh, a bit of a mess. Flip it over, bring the bottom down, stretch out the sides. The top comes down, and then we're just gonna cross the arms and stitch up this loaf to give it a nice surface tension. Roll it over like that. And I'm just gonna let this rest on the table while I shape the next, and then we'll pick it up and put it in the basket. So I like to start them over here and just keep going down the line. Now you wanna start on the side that you first pre-shaped. Usually the first one, which would be that one, but I'm starting the one closest to me just because it's had the most resting time, and that's usually where you wanna start. So stretch out the sides, bring the top down, and then we're just gonna cross the arms and work our way down the loaf, stitching it up, and just a gentle roll over. Now, depending on the flour you're using, how you mix your dough, if it's really tight, you don't want to stitch your dough on a very tight loaf of bread. So if you find that it's tearing when you pull out the sides like this, for example, or when you start to stitch it here. So if you find that this is hard and the dough's ripping on the side, you either need to be a bit more gentle or shape it in a different method. Roll it over. There we go, great. I'm gonna keep shaping these, and then we'll get them into the baskets. I don't know if that's on the camera, love. You might have to be more in the middle. Got our BANNETONs, we're gonna get these ready. These are from TMB Baking. Get asked this question all the time, so I thought I'd just shout it out. And I'm gonna lay these out on the table, and then I'm gonna dust them with a combination of rice flour and rye flour. So there's equal parts 50-50. You could also add some coarse bran in there. I like the way it looks on the loaf. I also don't really like the way that rice flour looks on its own or tastes, and I really don't like a lot of flour on the loaf, so I just dust them as little as possible. The next thing I'm gonna do, we're gonna dust the top of the loaves with flour, scoop it up so that it's upside down, and when you hold it, you'll see that it's wet on half and half, and I'm just gonna gently press that together to get rid of that sort of open wet spot. And that's gonna develop a little bit of extra tension that's gonna give us a little bit more spring in the oven. So you don't have to squeeze it shut or press it. You're just looking to put those two ends together like that till they touch, and that should be enough to stick it. You can see you've got a line down the middle of the dough, so you can actually see where it was. And we're just gonna scoop these up and get them in the baskets, and then I'm gonna place a bag on them and put them in the fridge. I'm gonna now cover these with a bag and get them in the fridge right away. They look really puffy to me and I don't want these to keep proofing, so I'm gonna try and chill them. I'm gonna take the bag and then I just place it into the corner and leave a bit of air inside the bag like that so that the bag's not directly touching the bread. That's it, we'll get them in the fridge and I will see you tomorrow. These are gonna have 10 to 14 hours of rest in the fridge and we'll bake them off in the morning. My doughs have been resting in the fridge overnight and it's time to bake our bread now. I couldn't wait. I've already baked a few behind me. And I must say they turned out amazing. I haven't cut one open yet. I'll do that with you. But we're gonna grab some loaves from the fridge, score them and bake them. Let's grab our bread out of the fridge. Now they were covered overnight. I just uncovered them about a half an hour ago to give them a chance to dry out a little bit. It makes them easier to score and handle. You can see that they've risen nicely. They're relaxed in the basket. If you press into it, it's gonna spring back but leave a slight indent. I'm using parchment here so I can slide them into the oven. You could also dust them if you want. It just smokes a bit and my oven's in the basement so I don't like the smokiness. So I'm gonna start by turning this and we're gonna flip out our bread onto, make some space here. And we're gonna flip our bread out. So we're gonna do 1, 2, and 3. Now I could fit 4 in my oven at a time, but I'm just gonna do 3. I'm in no rush right now. So gonna press into them. They should spring back. They should hold their shape. Next, we're gonna score them with the blade. The score is gonna allow them to rise, get a nice aesthetic. We're gonna do 1 clean cut down the middle. So you're gonna place the blade on, open it up, and cut. A little bit of confidence there, drawing right through. You don't wanna go too deep, but this is pretty good. We are gonna bake our bread in the Tom Chanley Pico Plus. This is a steam injected deck oven. You can see it's got the hearth here. It's got the temperature setting on the side and a damper to vent the steam. So the first thing we're gonna do, bring our bread. Going to just put it all the way in and slide it off the board. Then we're going to use the steam injection. Next up, we're gonna use our steam injection. So this is just a little thing that goes into the bottom of the oven here like this. You can see it getting a bit steamy. Close, and then I like to drop the temperature to 210 on the top and bottom, allowing the loaves to get their full potential rise before I vent the steam. And now we're gonna bake these for about 16, 17 minutes with steam, then I'll vent the steam for another 20 minutes or so. My timer just went off. It's time to open the damper. So that's this. If you're baking in a Dutch oven, you're gonna wanna remove the lid halfway through. You can see they've risen really nicely. They've just started to turn golden brown, and I'm gonna turn the oven back up to 250. The only reason I turn this one down is just so that they can rise to their full potential. I've just found it helps in this particular deck oven, but each oven's different, so you have to sort of look at what you've got. We're gonna let these bake for another 16, 18 minutes, and then we'll take them out and we'll cut one in half and take a look. My timer just went off. It's time to take the bread out of the oven. I'm gonna throw these baskets up here to let them dry out, so otherwise they get... I've got a video all about Bannetons, and I'll leave a link for that in the description below as well. Gonna pull these breads out, just slide it onto the parchment. Whoa, they look amazing. Killer bake. Let's go upstairs and we'll cut one open. I just love the contrast of color, that beautiful golden brown. I mean, just look at that. Beautiful bloom, oven spring, smells amazing. I'm gonna let this cool down a little bit, and then we're gonna cut it open, give it a taste, and see what it's like inside.